In a manner of speaking, Achhe Din is here for the left and democratic minded people and sections of society. Now this may sound odd to all of us. How can I say when you have RSS Pracharak and a mass murderer as the Prime Minister of the country, RSS is actually ruling the roost and calling the shots. But I believe it's precisely because of this, because it compels the left and democratic organizations to mark its position, sharply demarcates its position from the right wing, something that was not possible during the 10-year rule, and because of the Congress. There is always this illusion that the Congress carries, which creates this, which has always acted as a brake on left and democratic movements, and especially civil liberties and democratic rights movement, which feels that, well, things are slightly better when the Congress is in power than BJP, which robs us of an opportunity to actually look very critically and examine very, examine things, our pet understandings, our analysis of what is happening around us and in the society. I believe that actually the Achhe Din, rather than Narendra Modi might have meant whatever he meant, because one doesn't know what he means most of the time, since there is such a dichotomy between what he says and what happens all the time, so that it's very difficult to make. But it is Achhe Din because it compels us to take a position, to demarcate ourselves, to know that even when we differ, when we oppose, we are compelled to come out, to think about it, reflect over it, to come out with facts, figures, with arguments, with reasoning, and not just rhetoric and cliche, because that is not going to get us anywhere. It's from that perspective I believe that of course it's a challenging thing, because just when it is also good for us, of course it's true that the parochial, the narrow-minded thinking also shows this proliferation because of the kind of patronage that they get. Much more today than earlier. But if you look at what happened in the last year, then I think there is something to feel good also about. Look at the whole issue of freedom of speech and the manner in which this freedom which was used by the right-wing forces, and rather than helping them, rather than helping their cause, it actually not just scared away, it also repulsed wide section of the people. Even those who were enamored, who were taken in, even they have been compelled to raise questions and examine after all where are things headed. From that point of view, I believe, this is also a position that UDR adopts, that it's better to err on the side of freedom of speech all the time and take an absolutist position rather than be cautious and demand, shut them up, file cases against them, etc., because actually it serves a great purpose, because it exposes them, it allows us to make our voices heard, it's providing us with an opportunity that we have to seize. Things are not going to fall on our lap, it's how you act, how we intervene in the different matters, that is going to take us. And there is that opportunity today. There is a mood in the country which is moving, shifting left of center. Whether we are aware of it, whether recognize it, it is there. You can see in it. You can see in it in the everyday experience, where in Delhi it's very common to hear, जब से नरेंद्र मोदी सरकार आई है तब से ये होने लगा है. जब से नरेंद्र मोदी सरकार आई है, I mean the common sense. Just think about it. It's very different. So it's not as if things are disastrous, that we should be lamenting, that we should feel pessimistic. On the contrary, I believe that it's actually provided us with an opportunity to intervene, to work harder. Because here is an opportunity for us to intervene and to show and take things in a direction that we want to. It is possible for us to do it. This is what I believe. And I believe that it's possible to in fact, there is nothing to say that things are going to get worse. I don't subscribe to that. It can, but it can also improve. But a lot depends on us. Having said that, now let's take a look at what has happened How much time do I have? Okay, I've already taken out 10 minutes, is it? Or
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay, 15 minutes. Let me start with the changes. 20 more minutes, oh, thanks. I'll just cover 2, 3. I don't want to take away time from Professor Hargopal and Teesta because there's a lot that they have to say which I'm also very keen on listening to. I would have loved to listen to Professor Hargopal because he always sets the and provides the context and it makes very much, things much easier for us to, say what we have to say. But anyway, let's see what are the changes that are taken. But the first thing I notice is the change in the discourse on Jammu and Kashmir. Why? Suddenly you find in 1 year the mood. There has been the discourse has shifted. In last 1 year, and if you read the newspapers, you read the editorials, you follow the electronic channels, you suddenly discover that the stridency and the jingoism and the chauvinism that's coming out to the fore, it's something which was not there 2, 3, 4 years back. In the way in which, even so-called respectable newspapers carry edits which use words like traitor, anti-nationals, pro-Pakistani elements. There are newspapers which carry in their headlines statements by rascals from the RSS, people like Mr. Resh, who's actually been implicated in the Abhinav Bharat, the terrorist cases and all, whose statements on Jammu and Kashmir very recently, when he said, hang them, throw them, do whatever, but let's get rid of them, all these pro-Pakistan elements from Kashmir. This language hides something else. This shift is also an emergence of a majoritarian thinking about Kashmir, which is also gripping the imagination of the Indian middle classes and thinking people. A lot of liberals and Democrats are also pretty confused about Kashmir. So let me begin by pointing out what are the disturbances about it. One, we all know that the last turnout in the Jammu and Kashmir election, and especially in the Kashmir, was not because people suddenly fell in love with Indian democracy and suddenly discovered the beauty and the strength of India's electoral politics and the possibility of bringing about change through electoral politics. That's utter bosh and nonsense. The reason why people came out and voted in large numbers was primarily because they wanted to ensure that BJP does not win a single seat in Kashmir. As a result, all the seats in which the BJP candidates were put up, all of them, lost even the deposit. This wouldn't have happened. If people had come out to vote in favor of somebody, they would have voted Mr. Mufti Sayyid to an absolute majority. They didn't. Even a party like National Conference, which had been discredited, and finally, because of what happened during the floods in September last year, this safe fact now is being drawn. People are coming, it's now common. People stand up in large numbers. There is no support for right of self-determination or Azadi. That these are just handful of people. And that all it takes is that it's over time if Mufti Sayyid would manage to put things back in order. And Kashmir would become an integral part of India. Very good. If somebody wants to live in Fool's Paradise, they're welcome to it. Reality is something very entirely different. Let's take 2, 3 issues. Let me just illustrate them by them and move to another subject. Let's look at 2 or 3 things. The whole halagulla about Mustard Kala. Who is Mustard? Or this whole talk about Pakistani flag. Today's newspapers in the front page carries news item that at Gilani's rally yesterday in Tral, Pakistani flags, green flags were flying and pro-Pakistani slogans were. This is nothing new in Kashmir. This has been happening from 1947. What is so new about it? It's only because we've discovered this is something to target, this is to say, that these are a handful of people who are anti-national, they should be shut up. Just as you have shut up Masrat Alam and put him behind bar under preventive detention for another 2 years, we have to get rid of all these people, put them either behind bar or ship them across to the other side. Because as Chetan Bhagat, the great literary figure in this country, wrote on 15th May 2014, if you don't love India, leave India. This was in an Reddit page article that he wrote, I forget, I think Times of India, Hindustan Times. Nobody else I could carry. But it's one of these two national newspapers. Very good. But how do you get rid of 12 million people? I mean, half of them, I mean, either you kick them out or kill them. I mean, you have very few choices. And even if you take Mr. Gilani and send him to Islamabad, you think that's going to end. Way back in 1947, when National Conference was in power, please remember, anybody listening to Radio Pakistan was arrested, beaten up, tortured, or forced into exile. That practice has continued. So there is nothing new in Kashmir about this. And after all, it is a disputed territory. So why do we expect that there won't be people who support accession in Pakistan? And what is wrong if these people come out and shout slogans? Is it the end of the world? And contrast this with what happens elsewhere. Our great statesmen like Praveen Togadia, Ashok Singhal, Sakshi Maharaj, Adityanath, you name it, all of them come out and say all kind of crazy things. What was Masrat Alam's thing? Of course, it was what he said. That one slogan that he shouted was even offensive for me. Why? He said, Hafiz Saeed ka jo arman, Kashmir banega Pakistan. Absolutely. I also uphold Lashkar-e-Taiba. As far as I am concerned, there is no difference between them, Bajrang Dal, RSS or Shiv Sena. Absolutely no difference between them. So it's repulsive to hear somebody say anything. But are you going to put somebody behind bar and make him into an arch traitor as Mr. Nation does all the time, every time? Is Masrat Alam, I mean, what is Masrat Alam? Masrat Alam never picked up gun. Out of 17 years out of last, in the past 25 years, he's been in jail. Since 2007, 6 times TSA has been used and 26 times since 1990. In preventive detention. There's not even a charge sheet where it could result in not just prosecution but conviction of this person in the last 25 years. But he's become our arch enemy. Media can also create their demons. And he fits the bill, he looks bulky, look at his beard, look at what he wears, and it typifies. I mean, it signifies something that our media claims represents somebody who's anti-national. Fits the bill. So nobody raises a question, nobody raises it. Wait a minute. I mean, if Praful Togadia on 1st March 2002, when people were being killed, massacred, raped, looted in Gujarat, on Zee TV he came and he was exhorting people to carry on with the good work that you are doing. Begging people to do more. These were fighting words. I believe in freedom of speech, but fighting words are something else. In the midst of a carnage or a massacre that is taking place, asking people to carry on with the massacre or carnage, those are fighting words. Nothing happened. He can't be touched. There is something which brings me to the next point. There are, I believe, and be sincere, we are seriously, it's with great deal of sadness that we have to say, we believe that we have reached a point where it's absolutely clear that there is no uniform criminal. We can talk about uniform civil code, there is no uniform criminal in this country. And that's coming out even clearly now. This practice did not show, it did not begin with Achhe Din that Mr. Narendra Modi brought. It has a long history, but what it shows is that it's going to become much worse if they are allowed to carry on along the same line. point I'm trying to make is, if you look at the history from 1947 to now, and especially 1960 to now, I mean, when the first major anti-Muslim riot took place in Jabalpur, starting there now, we have an uncontaminated history on not prosecuting a single perpetrator of those carnivals. The story of Hashimpura is not just a story of those 19 people who were implicated, friends. As Vibhuti Narayan Rai points out, far more startling there is the role of the Indian Army, which, as a private army, it was not even called. Major Kaushik, whose brother was killed, gets his unit, which was posted there in Meerut cantonment, to come out, search the houses, raid the houses, pick up all the young men, load them onto PSC vans. They were then taken by the PSC and killed. Next day, there was another round of massacre in Haryana. 5 years before that, there was another round of killing by PSC in Hashimpura. These are long history. Different countries, different people have come to power since then. So we can't also be mindful that what was before Narendra Modi came to power, a groundwork had been created by the previous regimes, which suits this government which has come to power very well. And they can take great advantage from it, because they know that they are only following the precedent set by the earlier government, that you treat crimes committed by the right-wing Hindutva forces in one way, and you crack down on crimes committed by other sections in a different way. And this practice we see happening again and again. Everybody is falling into the trap. The presence of BJP has also propelled and forced some of these parties, like Samajwadi Party, to come out and show the true colors, where the majoritarian leading comes out much more clearly. So BJP's coming to power has not only contributed, has not only affected, it has also contributed to influence the manner in which some of these regional parties operate. So you'll find that the right wing, which I think in the long run is very great, it's a very good thing for us. In the long run, if we are aware of it and if we can seize on these opportunities that are provided, because there is going to be a polarization which clearly demarcates where you stand. You cannot be on the side of both sides. You can't be a fence sitter in today's situation. You have to choose your side and you have to stick to that side. This possibility is happening. Although it also means simultaneously in the short run that these parties, these regional parties which are falling victim to or openly coming out with a majority in the they would tend to strengthen the hands of the right-wing forces. But there are also limits. The third area that is of major concern, and which is we are finding, I mean, from this Gujarat terror bill, brings out very clearly. Of course, Gujarat is not the only state which has an organized crime bill. Gujarat is much before that the Maharashtra organized crime bill had come about. There are few differences between the two, but essentially it still remains the same. There are problems with the Gujarat bill and things like that. But what is alarming about the Gujarat bill today is that it's showing it shows a possibility where many of the things that we have fought against, many of the arguments that we advance to counter, are going to meet with legal barriers. For instance, one of the most alarming things about the Gujarat bill is this whole section, I think it's section 25, which talks about good faith. Good faith is something which is the worst. I mean, it didn't start in 2014. There is a long history. There is a patriable judgment of the Supreme Court which actually laid down very categorically what good faith means and how good faith prevents taking up of issue or filing of cases or pursuing cases which are filed against security forces or government officers. But what the Gujarat Bill does is, it establishes that now, from now onwards, challenging even this presumption of good faith is going to be very, very difficult. We all know that it's next to impossible to get, even forget about armed conflict area where the wars are taking place. Even in ordinary, elsewhere, which are not declared disturbed, it's so very difficult to get prosecution, to start prosecution of police officers or government officers who are implicated in serious and heinous crimes of one kind or other. Why do I say that? Of course, Supreme Court had said that, but there was still a possibility that one could challenge. But if state after state introduces this and lays down that presumption of good faith would prevail and would be part of the law which they enact, it's surely going to be a challenge for us to get that vacated. So getting sanction from the state or the central government is going to be next to impossible. The third thing that Achhe Din has brought about is the fact that the police and the security forces definitely feel much more indebted, as they have not done in the last so many years. Yes, they were being encouraged, they were gaining, they were being empowered by a variety of laws that were passed, but the ease with which deaths in so-called fake encounter deaths are taking place in recent times. I think Kalpana Kannan brought her attention in that wonderful piece that she wrote in Hindu after the two encounters that took place, one in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, when she pointed out that suddenly it looked as if all the work that one had done, all the years of struggle to get encounter itself became a pejorative word. It seemed as if we had lost it. Yes, that, of course, it's been arrested thanks to the massive protests that took place. The wide number of civil liberties and human rights groups got into the act and revealed the true story and brought out the true facts. Media helped contributed to it. So of course, it feels that all is not lost. But please understand one thing, that is, even this doesn't compel us to, doesn't persuade me to believe that anything will happen to those people who were implicated in this crime. Finally, they get away scot-free. That is the unfortunate thing. So while we may welcome the fact that there is an SIT inquiry taking place, that it's at least in public perception, both the states have been damned, and everybody knows that these were fake encounters and these were not real encounters. Yet the possibility of getting any conviction, not that we were getting conviction even earlier, but the possibility of getting in conviction under the present set of conditions, it's going to be very, very difficult. There is no way in which any state government is going to allow, give sanction for prosecution. One of the most alarming things, the process that began under UPA is one after another how variety of laws have been tweaked, and I don't need to spell out, you would all know by reading the newspaper that whether it's Forest Rights Act, whether it's, forget about even the land acquisition under the Forest Rights Act, and what has happened in just 1 year. If we go by the stats which were released on the floor of the Parliament, I think David was which said that about 36,000, I think 36,000 is the figure that the government said in 1 year, in 783 cases were cleared and 36,000 hectares were diverted for non-forest use. That's going to increase. I was recently in the month of December, happened to be in Bastar, and what I found very disturbing was the fact that this time it's not the private sector. It's the state NDMC and the Chhattisgarh Mineral Development Corporation, which are opening up mines in areas where people are fighting against it, resisting it. And there's not much hue and cry over it. You see, if Tata's, SR, Jindal and somebody, then there might have been a different kind of a... But somehow where the state, the public sector units go into and become and start digging the earth for minerals, it seems that something happens to us. I don't understand the reason, but there is some reluctance to go openly and critique and take on the state sector for the mineral activities, which has increased in Bastar area. So far, we knew in that in Bastar, and as a result, both in south as well in North Bastar, different either mines have already started working or the process of opening new mines has already begun. And new steel plants are coming up in Bastar. Now, years of struggle, and really starting from 2005 when Salwa Judum began, even prior to that, but Salwa Judum actually gave a fillip to the resistance in a way which also spread widely across the country, because that link between land grab, forest grab, paving the way for mining corporations to come in and occupy land, and the resistance to it, we did see make an impact. It did stop, it did whittle down. In 2011, in 2010, we reached 210 million tons of iron ore was extracted because of Supreme Court's intervention, because of popular resistance. As a result of it, it has shrunk to 110 million metric tons. So, that itself clearly shows that there was a decrease in opening up of new mines. It's going to reverse. Without even realizing it, it's going to pick up in the coming years. I fear that there's going to be an increase. The steel, iron and steel companies, primarily the sponge iron mills. There are about 74 sponge iron mills which have stopped working in Karnataka, and they're putting pressure on the government to allow them, either they should be given captive mines, or the prices of iron ore, which they are forced to buy, the prices at which they are forced to buy should be brought at par with the international market prices of iron ore, which has actually come down, whereas the Indian iron ore prices haven't. And primarily because both the NDMC and the private sector are making quite a nice pile of money as a result of this. And there is a gap between the domestic prices and the international prices. So we are going to see, and also there is going to be a rise in iron ore export. There is a likelihood, because the Goan mining industry is putting pressure on the government of India, and they have a good working relation with the RSS. They are big, old-time supporters of RSS, Salgaonkar and many other of these families. Old-time, we all know that. It's not a hidden fact that many of the old houses have been big-time and old-time supporters of the right-wing forces in this country, whether it is Hindu Mahasabha or the RSS. So the possibilities of this happening, unless the resistance picks up again and stops it and sparks the government from doing it, there is a possibility also of that happening. Because it's not as if everybody is sitting back and thinking that bad times have come, we can't do anything about it. That's not happening in this country. Nevertheless, we have to be aware of the fact that this pressure is being built up, and it can result in opening up of mines of the kind that we've thought would become difficult for the government because of the various legislations that have been enacted as a result of popular pressure. At least some, that some concessions had to be made to the people given the nature of the resistance that was put up. A similar kind of resistance is required to be. The other area of concern, of course, communalism we all talk about, and we've been confronted with, and we were opposing it, whether it is under the Congress or BJP. But with BJP coming to power, I believe that here is an opportunity. I'm absolutely convinced that this situation actually is providing us with an opportunity that we are not thinking of. For instance, and I want to end on this one, because I don't believe that there is any reason for us to feel pessimistic. Yes, it's tough. There are a lot of challenges. Parochialism is rising, all that is true. But I also believe, and I'm convinced of it, that it also provides us with a possibility that we are not thinking of, which is that it's also creating a polarization, and it's for us to force things in a direction, and if we can, we are not so weak as we pretend to be, we are not as fragmented as we make it out to be. There are occasions in which all of us come together, and thanks to Narendra Modi in power, a lot of people are coming together and they are willing to bridge those differences or postpone certain battles for another day to fight big. So there are various possibilities. One thing I believe that has happened is at the level of mass perception, where the BJP and the RSS is trying to work systematically to create a different kind of a discourse. A latest example of that, I was just telling Professor R. Gopal while we were sitting and chatting. This happened just the other day. Rakesh Sinha is a very well-known intellectual of the RSS variety, and you know what the RSS intellectuals are like. He has prepared for Directorate of Publicity, Information and Broadcasting Ministry a booklet on the great, it's a discovery, I'm 62 plus. It's the first time I heard that Mr. Hegdewar was a great freedom fighter. And this is an imaginary conversation, supposed to be not an imaginary, but it's actually an imaginary conversation between Gandhi and Hegdewar, where Gandhi is praising RSS for the wonderful work that they are doing. Brilliant. And it's going to be sold in millions and crores of copies. Government का पैसा है, मुफ्त में है, बेचो. It will be publicized right, left, and center. When Rakesh Sinha was asked, what about your sources? Because surely if you're writing something like this, what about your... He says, in Directorate of Publicity documents that are brought out, we don't carry any sources. And the Government of India doesn't require any sources. They can write and produce whatever they want and distribute it. So brilliant. So now we are going to be told that Sunday, which we didn't know, that RSS played a monumental role in freedom struggle. Now my point is this, and this is the point I want to stop. I think here is an opportunity for us. We know that these are liars. We know that they are concocting history. We know that they are distorting facts. Here is a possibility of, as a concerted effort, not isolated, with all the civil liberties, democratic rights organizations, social movements come together and prepare just a statement and raise certain questions to the RSS. And just demand to know. Simple things we want. I want to know. I want to know if RSS played such a role and we have been kept ignorant of this fact. I would like to know what was the great contribution during the freedom struggle. You see, please understand one thing. You see, no matter how much I dislike Congress, no matter whatever problems we had with various Congress parties, one fact is true. Even Hindu Mahasabha, I had to concede with great reluctance, but I have to concede, of the socialists. At least all these four categories of ideologies or perspectives played a role in the freedom struggle. Whatever role they play. You want to condemn Gandhi and call him social fascist, you're welcome to it. I don't subscribe to it, but if somebody wants to believe it, fine. But what you cannot deny is the fact they were part of a freedom struggle. Whatever they were doing, whether they played on behalf of the Indian bourgeoisie or the international capital, they did play a role. RSS can't play that. That is my biggest worry. I said, where have they come from? So, since we know that there is no truth in the matter, let's demand to know that we are very happy to know that Mr. Hegdewar played a very great role. And RSS also played. Please provide it with simple things. As ordinary citizens of this country, we want to know what are, if you can provide us with some sources. Because, sources is what we require in this day and age. After all, it's 21st century, it's not 19th century where you can say anything, or 18th century where you can say anything. Let's find out. I'm ending. This was Similarly, let's ask them, this it will get them. See, what was their relationship with the British Raj? Let's ask them. How, a lot of people have done a lot of work, so we know what was said, what was done during, in various periods. Even if you try and suppress facts, there are some things which you can't suppress. The media can suppress it, but those facts are available elsewhere which we can use. So my point is very simple. Let's come out with a statement demanding simple answers from RSS to A, B, C, D, these questions. Whatever questions that we can think of, very simply put. And let's demand an answer. Let's start a discussion. They are the ones who are calling the shots. It's time that we reverse it. We pose questions. We demand to know. That's the way in which we have to go about. Sitting back, moaning and groaning about it, or thinking, bad times have come, things are going to be bad. Sorry folks, it's not going to work. We have not to be on defensive, we have to be on the offensive, because the situation provides us with that. Please understand that. And the reason why I'm saying that is, please understand, if Mr. Rahul Gandhi, who suddenly has put the BJP ministers and made them very jittery, I don't know brief about him. The reason I'm saying it is that if he's saying whatever he's saying, it's not because he suddenly discovered all this truth. No, it's all on the basis of market analysis. It's all done on the basis of finding out what the mood of the public is. And the mood of the public is certainly moving in the direction of left or center. If this is true, and I believe that this is the reason why he's saying what he's saying. Otherwise, can you imagine the Congress leaders saying that one has to think about the farmers and the working class? This doesn't sit very well in that, does it? So suddenly, it's not only because of opposition, because they have discovered that that is the weakness, that is the move, that is what is happening in this country. So if I am right, then I believe that there is all the reason for us to raise and demand answers from RSS rather than sit back and think things are not going to be easy for us, but it's also not as bad as we're trying to make it up. And I believe that there is a possibility for us to resist, there is a possibility for us to make intervention, and our possibilities of making ourselves heard, which was not possible some time back. So let's seize on these possibilities, because then actually the Achhe Din will come, because the Achhe Din is actually, that's why I welcome. They dare not use the word Achhe Din. We can. Not just to mock, but actually because we know that the history and society provides us with a possibility today. Depends on us whether we grab it and make our interventions and work towards it. Otherwise, things will be as they are, and they'll return to haunt us again. Thank you very much.